The Vyreth research station looked like someone had convinced starlight to hold still long enough to build with it. Dr. Kael Threnody checked his credentials at the security checkpoint and tried not to feel like the universe's least qualified xenobiologist. He'd studied alien species for a decade, but that didn't make walking into a station full of telepaths any less intimidating. Dr. Threnody, a Vyreth official, greeted him, her long ears tilting forward in what his cultural briefing had labeled polite professional interest. "Welcome to Station Lumina. Director Vane is expecting you." "Thank you." Kael shouldered his research equipment. "I appreciate the opportunity to study your bioluminescent ecosystems. The data your team has collected is remarkable. We pride ourselves on thorough documentation." The official guided him through corridors that seemed to glow from within their walls, ambient bioluminescence serving as both lighting and art. "Your quarters are in the guest wing. The director will brief you on collaborative opportunities." Collaborative opportunities sounded promising. Kael had spent too many research trips working in isolation because language barriers or cultural differences made partnership difficult. The Vyreth were known for their scientific rigor, and he hoped this posting would involve actual teamwork. Director Vane's office overlooked the station's central atrium, where Kael could see researchers moving in comfortable clusters, their long ears tilting and rotating in what he guessed was telepathic conversation too subtle for words. The director himself was older, his ears bearing the silver threading that marked experience and status. "Dr. Threnody, I've read your work on symbiotic bioluminescence. Impressive for a human." Vane's tone suggested this was a genuine compliment rather than backhanded dismissal. "We have several researchers who might benefit from collaboration with you. Dr. Vyreth studies deep-sea organisms. Dr. Kelson focuses on atmospheric adaptation." Kael listened to the list, watching the atrium below. Most researchers moved in pairs or groups, but one figure worked alone in a sealed lab visible through transparent walls. A woman, her long ears marked with silver patterns different from the status threading, more intricate, almost like circuit diagrams. She moved with efficient grace, her attention focused on complex equipment while everyone else clustered in their telepathic groups. "Who's that?" Kael asked, pointing. Director Vane's ears pressed briefly flat, discomfort, the briefing had said. "That's Dr. Seris Navene. She's a genetic researcher. Brilliant, but her work is controversial. I would recommend partnering with Dr. Vyreth instead. His research aligns more closely with your stated interests." The deflection was obvious enough that Kael's curiosity sharpened. "What makes her work controversial?" "The specifics are complex. Vyreth scientific culture has certain standards that Dr. Navene sometimes challenges." Vane's tone suggested the conversation was concluded. "Now, let me show you the laboratory facilities you'll be using." Kael followed, but his attention kept returning to the woman in the sealed lab. Brilliant but controversial, working alone while everyone else collaborated. The silver markings on her ears that weren't quite status symbols. Something was wrong with that picture, and Kael's xenobiologist instincts, trained to notice patterns and anomalies, were screaming that he should understand what. His first week at Station Lumina taught him several important things. Vyreth telepathy was subtle but pervasive, creating social dynamics he could observe but not participate in. The research was cutting-edge and fascinating. And Dr. Seris Navene was systematically avoided by every other researcher on the station. He noticed it during communal meals, where Vyreth naturally formed clusters, their mental fields overlapping in ways that made conversation seem almost redundant. Seris always sat alone, eating quickly and leaving early. He saw it in the laboratories, where collaborative research meant multiple scientists working in the same space, thoughts flowing between them, except Seris, who remained isolated in her sealed workspace. "Why doesn't anyone work with Dr. Navene?" Kael asked Dr. Vyreth during a joint observation of algae samples. Vyreth's ears tilted back, uncertainty or discomfort. Her research methods are unconventional. She makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? It's difficult to explain to a human. You don't experience the Vyreth struggled for words. The resonance issues. Just trust that collaboration with her would be unproductive. Kael didn't trust that at all. He'd spent enough time studying alien species to know that difficult to explain usually meant culturally significant in ways outsiders can't easily perceive. Whatever made Seris uncomfortable to work with wasn't visible to him, which meant he might be uniquely positioned to not care about it. The station had a communal garden, artificially maintained but surprisingly peaceful, filled with plants collected from dozens of worlds. Kael went there in the evenings to decompress from days spent navigating alien social dynamics. On his 10th night, he found Seris there, examining a bioluminescent flower with the same focused attention she brought to her lab work. "That's a Kael night bloom," Kael said, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "They only luminesce when they sense carbon dioxide from potential pollinators." Seris looked up, and Kael saw surprise cross her face, probably not used to people initiating conversation. Up close, the silver markings on her ears were even more intricate than he'd thought, forming patterns that seemed to pulse faintly with their own light. "You're Dr. Threnody, the human xenobiologist." Her voice was careful, precise, like someone who'd learned to speak clearly because other communication methods had failed her. "I read your paper on symbiotic bioluminescence in deep-sea ecosystems. Your conclusions about energy transfer were insightful." "Thank you. I read some of your published work too. Your research on genetic integration of bioluminescent markers is brilliant." Kael gestured at the flower. "Is that what you're studying? Genetic mechanisms of light production?" "In part. I'm researching how complex organisms integrate bioluminescent pathways, whether it's possible to introduce adaptive luminescence to species that don't naturally possess it." Seris's ears tilted forward slightly. Interest, Kael recognized. Most consider it too theoretical to pursue. Most people said symbiotic relationships couldn't evolve in extreme pressure environments until I proved otherwise. Theoretical just means nobody's done the work yet. Kael studied the flower. "Would you be interested in collaboration? Your genetic work could combine well with my symbiotic studies." Seris's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Kael to parse. "You want to collaborate with me? Your research is fascinating and your methods look sound. Why wouldn't I?" "Because," Seris stopped, her ears pressing back slightly. "Dr. Threnody, you should know that other researchers avoid working with me for reasons specific to Vyreth culture. Director Vane likely warned you away from me." "He did. I'm choosing to ignore that advice." Kael offered a smile. "I'm human. Your cultural complications probably don't affect me, and I'd rather work with brilliant, controversial scientists than mediocre, conventional ones." For the first time since Kael had noticed her, Seris smiled. It transformed her face from carefully neutral to genuinely warm. "I would like that. Collaboration, if you're certain." "I'm certain." Kael pulled up his datapad, already thinking about how their research could intersect. "Can you show me your current work? I want to understand how you're approaching genetic integration." They spent the next hour in the garden, Seris explaining her research while Kael asked questions and offered insights from his own work. The conversation flowed easily, both of them falling into the comfortable rhythm of scientists who spoke the same intellectual language even across species barriers. When they finally parted, Kael noticed other Vyreth in the garden watching them with expressions he couldn't quite read. Seris noticed too, her smile fading into something more guarded. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "For treating my work as legitimate." "It is legitimate. Anyone who says otherwise is letting prejudice override evidence." Kael meant it, even if he didn't yet understand what prejudice she faced. Over the next few days he'd learn, and realize that what the Vyreth saw as a fundamental flaw, he saw as just another way of being, different maybe, but not lesser. Just someone brilliant, and lonely, who'd been waiting for someone to see past her people's fear to the person underneath. The collaboration began formally, with Kael and Seris sharing laboratory space and comparing data sets. It quickly became clear that Seris's isolation wasn't about her research methods. Those were impeccable. It was about her presence. Kael noticed it when other Vyreth researchers passed their lab. They'd glance through the transparent walls, see Seris, and either accelerate past or find urgent business elsewhere. During communal research presentations, Seris's contributions were acknowledged with stiff politeness, rather than the warm, collegial response others received. "Do you want to talk about why everyone treats you like you're radioactive?" Kael asked one evening after a particularly awkward interaction, where Dr. Vyreth had literally changed corridors to avoid walking past their lab. Seris was quiet for a long moment, her attention apparently focused on calibrating a gene sequencer. "It's a Vyreth matter, not something that would make sense to you. Try me. I've studied enough alien cultures to know that you wouldn't understand. Usually means, I'm afraid you'll judge me. I'm not afraid you'll judge me. I'm afraid you'll realize working with me is more complicated than you thought and withdraw your collaboration." Seris finally looked at him, her ears pressed flat in obvious distress. "Which has happened before, multiple times." Kael set down his datapad. "Seris, I'm not going to withdraw collaboration because of social dynamics I don't even fully perceive. But I'd like to understand what's happening, if you're comfortable explaining." Another long silence. Then Seris took a breath and spoke carefully, like someone explaining a personal tragedy in clinical terms to maintain composure. "Vyreth are telepathic. You know this. What you may not understand is that our telepathy isn't just communication, it's connection. Most Vyreth can share thoughts and emotions seamlessly. It's how we bond with family, friends, romantic partners. Touching minds is as natural as touching hands is for humans." "Okay, and that's difficult for you somehow." "I was born with a genetic mutation, extremely rare. My telepathic field is," she struggled for words, "incompatible, sharp. When other Vyreth try to connect with me mentally, it causes discomfort, sometimes pain, depending on how deep the connection they're attempting." Kael processed this. "So you can't share thoughts with your own species." "I can transmit. They receive my thoughts clearly, but reciprocal connection, the foundation of Vyreth bonding, causes them pain." Seris gestured at her ears, at the silver markings Kael had noticed. "These aren't status markers. They're medical indicators, warning other Vyreth that connection with me is inadvisable. That's why everyone avoids you. Not because of your research, but because telepathic connection is painful for them." "Yes, and in a culture where mental bonding is fundamental to every relationship, friendship, family, romance, I'm essentially unbondable. I've lived my entire life watching others form deep connections while I remain isolated. Every touch is just physical. Every conversation is just words. I don't experience the communion that defines what it means to be Vyreth." The loneliness in her voice struck Kael hard. He thought about human relationships, how much relied on nonverbal cues, shared understanding, the comfort of being known. For Vyreth, telepathy provided that on a level humans couldn't imagine, and Seris had none of it. "I'm sorry," he said, inadequate but genuine. "That sounds incredibly isolating." "It is, but I've adapted. I learned verbal communication better than most Vyreth because I had no choice. My research flourished because I spent time working instead of socializing." Seris's smile was small and sad. "I've accepted my limitations." "Have you?" Kael studied her. "Because it looks to me like you've accepted other people's limitations in accepting you. That's not the same thing." Seris's ears tilted forward, surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not defective. Your telepathy works differently than most Vyreth. That makes you unusual, not broken. The problem isn't you, it's a culture that defines connection so narrowly that anyone outside the norm gets excluded." Kael leaned forward. "I don't experience discomfort around you. I'm not telepathic at all. So from my perspective, You're just a brilliant woman who communicates in words because telepathy isn't an option. That's not a flaw. It's just a different way of being. You really believe that?" Seris said it with wonder rather than question. "I really do. Humans don't have telepathy. We form deep bonds anyway through words, actions, shared experiences. We figure it out." Kael smiled. Maybe Vyreth should try that sometime instead of deciding anyone who can't telepathically bond is inherently unbondable. For the first time since they'd begun this conversation, Seris laughed, surprised and genuine. "That would require significant cultural reformation. I'm not holding my breath." "Fair enough. But in the meantime, I'm still collaborating with you. And I don't find you uncomfortable or defective or whatever nonsense they've convinced themselves of." Kael returned to his datapad. "Now, show me those genetic integration results again. I think I see a correlation you missed." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, but Kael noticed the shift in Seris's posture, less guarded, more relaxed. Like someone who'd been braced for rejection and was slowly learning they might be safe. Over the following weeks, their collaboration deepened into genuine friendship. Seris showed Kael around the station's research facilities, explaining Vyreth technology in ways that assumed his intelligence rather than patronizing his human limitations. Kael introduced her to human research methods, pointing out that not every problem required telepathy to solve. Sometimes old-fashioned observation and documentation worked just fine. They fell into routines: morning lab work, afternoon analysis sessions, evening conversations in the garden where Seris seemed more herself than anywhere else on the station. Kael learned about her childhood as an outsider in her own family, her parents' well-meaning but ultimately isolating attempts to protect her from social rejection. He told her about growing up fascinated by alien species, feeling like an outsider among humans who thought studying non-human biology was weird. "We're both outsiders," Seris observed one evening, watching bioluminescent flowers pulse with their soft light. "You by choice, me by biology. Maybe, but outsiders see things insiders miss. Your research is brilliant precisely because you don't think like typical Vyreth scientists." Kael paused. "And I chose to study aliens because I was tired of human-centric thinking. We both value perspectives different from our own cultures." "Is that why you didn't avoid me? Because you actively seek difference?" "I didn't avoid you because you're brilliant, interesting, and everyone else's loss is my gain." Kael met her eyes. "Also because I've learned that when everyone says someone is difficult or unsuitable, it usually means they're challenging convenient assumptions. I like people who challenge assumptions." Seris's smile was small but genuine. "I like that about you too. You question everything instead of accepting cultural explanations at face value." Occupational hazard of being a xenobiologist. Can't study aliens effectively if you just accept their explanations of themselves. They continued talking as stars emerged in the viewport above the garden, neither wanting to return to their quarters and the loneliness that waited there. Kael found himself looking forward to these evening conversations more than any research data. Moments where he and Seris were just two people who'd found unexpected understanding across species barriers. He realized with dawning awareness, developing feelings for her that went beyond collegial respect. And from the way Seris looked at him, with careful hope that suggested she didn't quite believe she was allowed to feel what she felt, she might be experiencing something similar. The question was what to do about it, in a culture where bonding required telepathy she couldn't provide, and her people had spent her entire life convincing her she was unsuitable for connection. Kael, who'd spent his career studying how different species adapted to impossible circumstances, began thinking about whether humans and Vyreth could form bonds that defied both their cultures' expectations. Whether he could offer Seris what her own people never had, the certainty that she was worthy of being chosen. The shift from collaboration to something deeper happened gradually, like bioluminescence emerging as ambient light faded. Kael found himself thinking about Seris during routine tasks, wondering what she'd find interesting about observations he made, anticipating her reactions to data he analyzed. When she smiled at his jokes, carefully crafted puns about genetic sequencing that only a fellow scientist would appreciate, he felt absurdly pleased. He was falling for her. The realization came one evening when she was explaining genetic marker integration with enthusiasm that made her forget her usual caution, her ears tilting forward in excitement, her words flowing without the careful precision she usually maintained. She was brilliant and passionate and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with Vyreth standards and everything to do with who she was as a person. The complication was that Seris had spent her entire life being told she was unsuitable for bonding. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kael said during one of their evening garden sessions. They'd been discussing research, but the conversation had drifted into more philosophical territory about connection and belonging. "You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer." But Seris's tone suggested she would. "You mentioned earlier that you've accepted you'll always be alone. Do you actually believe that, or have you just been told it enough times that you're trying to protect yourself from more rejection?" Seris was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the bench between them. "That's a complicated question. Most important questions are." "I've proposed bonding 7 times over 15 years, Seris said finally, her voice carefully neutral in a way that suggested deep emotion underneath. "To researchers who respected my work, to acquaintances who seemed kind, to someone I thought might understand what being an outsider felt like." She looked up at the stars visible through the garden's transparent dome. "All of them refused, not because they disliked me, but because the discomfort of connecting with my telepathic field was too much to tolerate long-term. One man tried. We attempted bonding for 3 months. He described it as like static continuously scraping across his thoughts. He apologized for weeks before ending it." Kael felt anger on her behalf, not at the individuals who couldn't tolerate the connection, but at a culture that had given Seris no other framework for bonds beyond telepathy. "So you stopped proposing." "I stopped hoping. There's a difference." Seris's smile was sad. "Bonding isn't just romance, Kael. In Vyreth culture, it's legal recognition, family integration, social belonging. Without it, I'll always be peripheral to society. I've accepted that." "What if bonding didn't require telepathy?" Kael asked carefully. "What if there were other ways to build that kind of connection?" "That's a lovely thought, but impractical. Vyreth bonding is fundamentally telepathic. There's no legal precedent for." She stopped, understanding dawning in her expression. "You're not asking theoretically, are you?" "No." Kael took a breath, committing to what he'd been considering for weeks. "I'm asking because I care about you, not as a colleague, as someone I want in my life in all the ways that matter. And I don't need telepathy to feel that connection. I already have it through our conversations, our work, our shared understanding." Seris's ears pressed flat, distress or disbelief. "Kael, you don't understand what you're suggesting. Bonding is. I understand it's legally and socially significant. I understand it's supposed to involve telepathic communion. I understand every Vyreth who's ever connected with you has found it painful." Kael moved closer. "But I'm not Vyreth. I don't experience that discomfort. So maybe we could build something different, a bond that works for us rather than fitting into your culture's narrow definition." "That's not how bonding works." "Why not?" "Because tradition says so. Because nobody's tried it before." Kael met her eyes. "Seris, your entire life you've been told you're unsuitable for bonding because you don't fit the standard model. But what if the model is wrong? What if connection doesn't require telepathy, just willingness, effort, and genuine care?" "You're serious." Seris said it with wonder and fear in equal measure. "You're actually suggesting we could bond, human and Vyreth, without telepathic communion?" "I'm suggesting we could try, build something that honors what we have instead of mourning what we don't." Kael reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. I'm choosing you, Seris, not despite your differences, but including them, because you're brilliant and resilient and kind in ways your people have never recognized, because I want to build a life that includes you in all the ways that matter. Tears formed in Seris's eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd allowed herself to show without careful control. No one has ever chosen me before. Not really. They've tolerated me, worked with me, attempted connection out of obligation or curiosity. But you're saying you're choosing me deliberately, completely deliberately, with full understanding of what I'm offering. Kael squeezed her hand gently. I'm not promising it will be easy. Cross-species relationships rarely are. But I'm promising I see you, the real you, not the inadequate version your culture has convinced itself you are. And I'm asking if you'd be willing to build something with me that doesn't fit either of our species' traditional models but might work for us anyway. I don't know how to do this, Seris admitted, her voice shaking slightly. I've spent 35 years preparing for isolation. I don't know how to accept that someone genuinely wants to choose me. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time, starting with you telling me if you want this, not because bonding would give you social acceptance or legal status, but because you care about me the way I care about you. Seris was quiet for a long moment, her hand trembling slightly in his. Then she nodded, tears spilling over. I do care about you. I have for weeks. I was afraid to acknowledge it because every time I've allowed myself to hope, I've been disappointed. But you're different. You see me differently. You make me believe I might not be unsuitable after all. You're not unsuitable. You've never been unsuitable. Kael pulled her into an embrace, and Seris clung to him like he was the only stable point in a tilting universe. Your people have been wrong about you your entire life. Let me prove it. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while bioluminescent flowers pulsed around them. Two people from different species who'd found connection in ways neither culture had prepared them for, building something new in the space where tradition failed to reach. Eventually, they'd have to navigate the legal complexities of cross-species bonding. They'd face skepticism from both their species. They'd figure out how to build a relationship without telepathy while surrounded by a culture that considered telepathic communion fundamental. But in that moment, in the garden under alien stars, Seris was being chosen for the first time in her life. And Kael was choosing to love someone whose differences made her stronger, not weaker. Sometimes revolution began quietly, with two scientists holding hands and refusing to accept that unsuitable meant unworthy. The administrative complications began immediately. Kael submitted a formal bonding petition to Station Lumina's legal office, and the response was bewilderment disguised as procedural inquiry. There's no precedent for human Vyreth bonding, the legal coordinator explained, their ears rotating in confusion. Vyreth bonding requires telepathic connection. You can't provide that, so we'll create precedent. Kael had prepared for this argument. Bonding is legally defined as a committed partnership recognized by Vyreth law. Nothing in the legal code explicitly requires telepathy. That's cultural tradition, not legal requirement. The entire framework assumes telepathy, the coordinator protested. The ceremonial vows, the bonding period, the integration into family groups, all depend on mental communion. Then we'll adapt the framework, use words instead of telepathic vows, build connection through actions and shared life instead of mental communion. Kael kept his voice even despite growing frustration. Or you can admit your laws discriminate against anyone who can't provide telepathic connection, which would mean Seris has been systemically excluded from a fundamental civil institution because of a genetic condition beyond her control. The coordinator's ears pressed flat. That's not what I'm saying. Then help us find a legal path forward instead of assuming the traditional method is the only valid one. It took 3 weeks, multiple legal consultations, and intervention from Director Vane, who surprised Kael by supporting the petition once he understood the situation. But eventually, The legal office produced a modified bonding framework that substituted verbal vows for telepathic ones and recognized partnership commitments built through actions and shared life rather than mental communion. They're calling it the Alternative Bonding Protocol, Seris told Kael, reading the legal documentation with an expression that cycled between disbelief and cautious hope. It's being treated as an accommodation for my condition rather than a legitimate parallel path to bonding. Progress happens incrementally. First they accommodate, then they normalize. Eventually they stop questioning why it was ever controversial. Kael took her hand. What matters is whether you want to do this. I do, but Kael, you need to understand what you're committing to. Seris's ears tilted in serious attention. Cross-species bonding is rare for good reasons. Our lifespans differ. Vyreth live approximately 150 years to humans 80. Our communication styles are fundamentally different. If we have children, they'd be unprecedented and probably amazing, Kael interrupted. Seris, I've thought about this. I understand the complications. I'm choosing this anyway because you're worth it, all of it. Why? The question came out small, vulnerable. Why would you choose me, when you could find someone easier? Someone human, someone who fits into neat categories. Because I don't want easy, I want you. Kael moved closer. Because watching you work is like watching someone solve impossible equations with elegant simplicity. Because you make terrible science jokes and think they're hilarious when nobody else does. Because you've spent your entire life being told you're unsuitable, and you still choose kindness over bitterness. He touched her face gently. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it. That's not complicated analysis. That's just truth. Seris kissed him then, her first kiss, she admitted later, because previous bonding attempts had always broken down before reaching physical intimacy. It was tentative and sweet, and completely without telepathic communion, which made it perfect for both of them. The bonding ceremony happened 6 weeks later in the station's formal reception hall. It was smaller than traditional Vyreth bondings. Seris had no close family who'd maintained contact once her condition became apparent, and Kael's family was back on Earth. But Director Vane attended. Several researchers who'd worked with Seris showed unexpected support, and even Dr. Meredith offered cautious congratulations. The vows were verbal rather than telepathic. Seris spoke carefully chosen words about finding connection in unexpected places and learning that different didn't mean lesser. Kael promised to build a life where she never felt unsuitable again, where her strengths were celebrated rather than her differences mourned. This is weird, one younger researcher whispered during the ceremony. Bonding without mental communion, how will they maintain?